I am here with Marianne Thormählen, Professor of English Literature at Lund University and a scholar of the Bronte Sisters, which I hope that we will touch upon today.
I would love that.
And thank you for taking a walk and talk with me.
Only too happy to, dear Ulrikke.
So, you have been at Lund University for years. Was it always...
Many years.
Was it set in stone that you were to pursue an academic career?
Absolutely not, no. It was set in stone that I would take a degree, but I always intended to become a translator. And in manner of speaking, I did become one. I mean, I've done a lot of translation work beside my academic work, but a career, no, certainly not. And what happened was that when I'd written my master's thesis, my then supervisor, Professor Claes Schaar, said, "Why not do a doctorate?" And I thought, okay, why not?
Why not?
If he thinks I can do it. But even then, it was certainly not with a view to having an academic career. But when I'd finished my doctoral dissertation on T.S. Eliot, an appointment came up and I applied for it and I got it. And
so a little bit of accident and a lot of heart.
And a lot of heart, certainly, but also a lot of luck.
Yeah.
You need to be lucky.
English literature.
Yeah.
Was it always the languages that sort of had your heart, or had you any idea that, like, did you not want to go into mathematics or anything like that? Was it always the literature that sort of captured your heart?
It was always literature.
Yeah.
Languages and literature, but languages because of literature.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the reason why literature captivates me and stimulates me, and always did, is that it enriches your life so immeasurably. Whatever you experience, for better or worse, the great writers have been there before you.
Yeah.
And they keep you company and they give you the words for what you've experienced.
The Bronte Sisters, let's go into them and talk about them. Because there are three sisters.
There were three sisters, Charlotte, Emily and Anne. There were originally five, but the two eldest died of lung disease as children.
But they were raised without a mother. Their mother died early.
Their mother died very early. They were raised in effect by an aunt, their mother's sister, and to some extent by their father, but their father, Patrick Bronte, was immensely busy and an extremely hard-working man, so he allowed his children a lot of freedom, and to some extent they raised themselves and one another.
But is that one of the reasons you think that they have contributed so much to literature, is that they had a different freedom?
Absolutely. No, it was totally decisive. They were allowed to read pretty much everything they wanted, which otherwise girls, certainly clergymen's daughters, would not have been allowed to do. But nobody really interfered, and they had a lot of time to spend in their imaginary kingdoms. And they wrote and they wrote and they wrote.
But how did they get discovered? Were they pursuing by sending in somewhere, or was it by accident that it...
Oh, indeed. It was by pursuit, and the pursuer was the eldest sister, Charlotte.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for Charlotte's dedication and for her determination that they should get on and they should make money, then the world wouldn't know anything about the Bronte family in Haworth. It was all
amazing.
Down to her tremendous drive
to get her word out.
Yeah.
Was it? Do you think that it was like an inner drive, a necessity to share, or was it just that she was an entrepreneur of her own time?
I think she was mainly entrepreneurial, you know. She had to find a way of making money. The only other way for the sisters to support themselves was by teaching. They all hated teaching. can't have been very good at it. And literary success would be a way to make enough money not to have to teach. And so I think, well, obviously, they were dedicated to what they were doing, sure, but I wouldn't say that there were any lofty ideals involved.
No.
It was a way of making money. Their first novels were published very much at the same time. Jane Eyre was actually published first, and then Emily's Wuthering Heights and Anne's Agnes Grey a couple of months later.
What are these books about, really? Because I imagine that's what scholars are trying to also determine, like, what is it in these books?
I think they're about assuming responsibility for and being allowed enough leeway to shape your own life and make something meaningful out of it.
That's beautiful.
It is. And that is partly why these books inspire so many people even today, because while obviously historical circumstances have changed, the obligation to make something useful, meaningful and beautiful of your life, this is something that faces every one of us.
It is.
And these books can help. I think the Brontes belong to those writers who communicate without any contextual understanding, really. But it would help, I think, readers to get more out of the books if they were more aware of what religion meant to people at that time. I wrote a book called The Brontes and Religion, which tries to explain that. And I think you do get more out of the books if you are aware of the religious context in a wide sense.
But what about the political as well? Were they political?
They certainly were. At least Charlotte was, again. Charlotte is funny in that she was politically a Tory, conservative, but she was radical too in her thinking. And and she was radical in that she insisted on the right of women to shape and create their own meaningful lives as well as men. But she was conservative in that she put her faith in the ancient British liberties and the British Constitution. She worshipped the Duke of Wellington, for instance. Charlotte was an ardent Protestant, of course, an Anglican, and the reason why she and so many others detested Roman Catholicism was that they regarded the priesthood as those who ruled over and dominated people. So that was the sort of freedom Charlotte wanted, the freedom to think for herself, the freedom to, within limits, act for herself and, as I said, shape her own life.
Were they feminists?
Hard to say, really, because that word means so many different things to different people, and certainly that is the case today.
Because, they were entrepreneurial, as you talk about. They were carving out a sort of a space for themselves.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it.
They sort of, they did have certain feeling of their own worth, it seemed.
Very much so. I think you might call them feminists in that they certainly believed that a woman's worth equaled a man's. And, well, in view of the fact that they were more successful in the eyes of the world, even though they were not famous in their lifetime, apart from Charlotte, of course, but Emily and Anne were very obscure and, as you know, died young. Yeah. But they did have a brother, Branwell, who was born between Charlotte and Emily, who was very, very promising as a boy, and then as a young man failed at everything and died aged 31 after years of abusing both alcohol and opium. So they, I think they never had the idea that as women they might be inferior.
Which is, I mean, it's a lot of like what we see and what we're exposed to that actually define who we become.
Yeah.
Which I think is such a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
When you study literature, from what aspect do you, like, if you're presented with a book, what is your sort of action plan when you sort of, do you have a mindset that you...
I never have a prepared mindset. I read the book very attentively and listen into it, and it then usually tells me where it wants me to do work to make it communicate even better in our time. So it's quite different. And I started out working on poetry. It's the same thing there. If you listen to the text carefully and you try to encounter it on its own terms, then it'll tell you what kind of work it wants. I know that as a woman I'm supposed to identify more strongly with the works of women writers, but that's not the case at all. I wrote my first books about male poets.
Yeah, they're the modernisms.
Well, there's T.S. Eliot, the modernist, but also a book about a 17th century poet who lived at the court of King Charles II. His name was Rochester. That was his title, John Wilmot, 2nd Earl of Rochester. And it would be hard to find anyone more different from myself, but Rochester's poetry said something to me, and I devoted about 10 years to studying it. And the fact that he lived several centuries before me was not an issue.
But is that because some of the human conditions are so preserved that the fear, the love, the anger, the archetypes, some would say, are what we're looking for in literature?
I think you're putting that very well. The human condition, la condition humaine. It's the same any time, every time. One of my favorite works of literature from Britain is a medieval poem called Pearl, and it centers on what is obviously a father's grief for his dead little daughter. Yeah. And I feel much closer to him than I do to any number of women writers in my own time.
Because he captured something of the essence of grief and of overcoming it and finding comfort. I do want to stress that anyone who enjoys reading and is imaginative and has an interest in human nature, in human emotions, perceptions and so on, can read and love the Bronte novels. Yeah. Which one do you prefer? Or does that depend on the day?
No, it would have to be Jane Eyre.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with The Tenant of Wildfell Hall a close second.
Yes. And that was Anne's, which has been...
That was Anne's second book, yeah.
That hasn't received as much praise as...
No, well, Anne was neglected even up to, I would say, the mid-20th century. She's only really come into her own in the past 50 or 60 years.
But what have changed that she has now entered the stage?
Well, I think people were unduly influenced by an idea which unfortunately Charlotte helped to propagate, an idea to the effect that Anne was not so powerful as a writer as Emily was. And well, you can see where that came from. Emily Bronte was unique.
Yeah.
But the sense that Anne is somehow the pale third beside the other two originates in that perception. But the contemporary reviewers too didn't say much about her first book, and her second book, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, caused a scandal.
Because of
its brutality.
Yeah. Or the description of the brutality, or it's because...
The brutality itself, because it is, to a large extent, a book about a disintegrating marriage, which disintegrates owing to alcoholism.
Yeah. Which they then knew from their brother.
Yes, they knew everything about that.
So they were able to give she was able to give a very precise,
and to many people far too precise.
Yeah.
So she was criticised because it was unnecessary to describe the various brutal and sad, miserable aspects of alcoholism quite as clearly as she did.
Yeah. Was that also because that she was the younger one? Do you think that hasn't, because we all talk about like what number of sibling you are in relation to...
How perceptive of you. I'm sure it has a lot to do with that, because she was the youngest. She was the little sister.
She was a little sister.
And big sister never takes little sister quite as seriously as little sister would like. Does she?
No.
So that was part of it also. But for Anne Bronte, feminism in literary criticism has been very good, because the feminist generation of critics round about 1970, 1980, they really discovered Anne Bronte and discovered how much they could get out of her work from their own points of view.
Yeah. And that again comes back to the point of view that you were in at that moment, that you find a voice that you need.
Yes.
And then Bront was in the voice that they needed.
Yes. I think that's very well put. And the woman who is the heroine of that book shows amazing strength and courage, and takes her life and her little boys into her own hands, even breaking the law doing so. So it's a very powerful book. But I'm very fond of it. But it has to be Jane Eyre first and foremost. I love that book, and I took it out of the bookshelf a little time ago. I hadn't been handling it for some time, and found myself caressing it as if it were a person.
Like a loving relationship that has been built.
A loving relationship. But funnily enough, my best scholarly work has been on Wuthering Heights. I think I made a greater difference to scholarship and criticism on Wuthering Heights than I've done to any one of the other books.
Yeah, but what were those? Like, where did you take that novel that it wasn't before?
I think I managed to show that people have had preconceived ideas about Wuthering Heights, ideas that don't really stand up to a reading of the actual book. And I believe that has something to do with the fact that there have been a number of films based on that book, as indeed there have been based on Jane Eyre as well. But characteristically, Wuthering Heights film versions portray Heathcliff as some sort of romantic hero, and anyone who reads the book realizes he's a monster. He really is. I mean, he's an imp of Satan. It's absolutely an infernal creation. And I think I managed to show that. Not everyone will agree, of course.
No, but I mean, it shows that again, it's going to the book with a clear mind and heart.
Yes.
To understand it for what it is and not what you may want it to be.
Yes.
A sensational love story of romance. Which of course is also a different kind of book, but maybe not that book.
No, there is a very touching love story in that novel, and it's in the second half where 3 young cousins grow up and have to deal with the pretty dreadful heritage that their parents have left them. And the young girl, Cathy, daughter of Catherine, and her cousin Hareton are a lovely couple, make a lovely couple towards the end of the book. And the reason why they can come together is that Cathy manages to, if not forgive Heathcliff, then at least try to disregard his crimes against her and her father. So she shows enormous magnanimity and generosity, and if she hadn't done that, then there wouldn't have been a satisfactory conclusion to the book. So Cathy and Hareton, that's a love story, all right.
Yes.
Catherine, the elder Catherine and Heathcliff, dreadful people, both of them. Catherine, monstrously selfish, pathologically so, I'd say.
Yeah.
And I think I've managed to show that by drawing on contemporaneous works of psychology. And of course people were interested in madness at that time.
Yes.
Because of the King's madness, among other things. And when you read early 19th century works about mental illness, then you recognize a lot in Wuthering Heights. I'm quite sure that Emily was very well aware of these developments in science.
That's amazing. Well, we have gotten to the end of the Botanical Garden.
So we have.
I want to say thank you.
Thank you very much
for coming out on a walk. It has been really enlightenment. Me too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.